When I woke up with damp hands and chewed fingernails, I was certain someone was invading my room at night. The horror made me plan my own death until I discovered, on one freezing dawn, the truth about the monster that touched me while I slept. Good morning, my dears. What a joy to see you all here today. You can call me Dorothy Mae Johnson. I'm 72 years young, born in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. But now I live in this welcoming little town of Millbrook in rural Pennsylvania. Time passes, hair turns white, but the heart stays warm, you know? Every morning, after my coffee with homemade cornbread, I pick up my needles and thread and start embroidering. You should see the tablecloths, pillowcases, and kitchen towels that come from these calloused hands. Each stitch carries a story. Each color brings a memory. I started embroidering as a young girl, taught by my late mother, God rest her soul. But it was only after turning 50 that I transformed it into a daily passion. Embroidering calms me, organizes my thoughts. It's almost like a silent prayer. Here in my little sitting room, with the window overlooking my small garden of red geraniums, I spend hours embroidering while listening to the radio. I have a green velvet armchair, a bit worn on the armrests, but it embraces me like an old friend. If you enjoy our conversation today, please do this grandmother a favor. Click that like button and subscribe to the channel. It's like you're knocking on my door for coffee. It brings me such joy to see people wanting to hear my stories. And you, my dears watching me now, tell me in the comments, which little town are you watching from? Are you having morning coffee with me, or is it lunchtime, or perhaps evening where you are? I read each comment with great care, and I'm happy to learn a little bit about your lives too. Let's exchange this affection, shall we? Today I'm going to tell you a story that deeply marked me. About how sometimes things aren't what they seem to be. About that difficult time, when I was about 15, when I experienced the biggest fright of my life. A story about love, but the kind that's rough, silent, that we only understand much later. When I was a teenager, I lived with my parents in a simple house with a dirt floor and wooden walls in rural Tennessee. My father, Benjamin, was a quiet man of few words, with rough hands from working in the fields. Oh, if you knew what happened in that house. But let's take it slow, because a good story is like freshly brewed coffee. It needs the right time to come out perfect. I was born in a simple house, but one full of life, there in Oak Ridge. My father, Benjamin, as I've already mentioned, was a man of the land. Calloused hands, sunburnt skin, small eyes that almost disappeared when he gave one of his rare smiles. He worked from sunup to sundown in our cornfield and vegetable patch on a small piece of land. My mother, Eleanor, was his opposite. Talkative, cheerful, always humming while taking care of the house and us. We were 5 siblings. I was the middle child. Above me, Gerald and Ida. Below, the twins Timothy and Thelma. Our house had just 3 rooms, the kitchen with a wood-burning stove, which was the heart of the house, the large bedroom where my parents slept with the young twins, and a smaller bedroom where I slept with Ida, while Gerald slept on a mattress in the living room that was set up each night. The floor was packed dirt, but always well swept by my mother. The walls were pine boards that my father got when he worked at the lumber mill. We had a large wooden table that my father made himself, where we all ate together. Outside, a wide yard where the chickens pecked and we children played. A little farther away, the outhouse, our external toilet, made of wood, with a hole in the ground. And a little way down, the well where we drew water for everything. We woke up with the rooster's crow, very early. My mother was already up, lighting the stove for coffee. My father left for the fields before the sun even rose. We children had coffee with milk and cornbread made by my mother and went to school. It was almost an hour's walk along a dirt path, crossing our neighbor's pasture, climbing a hill, crossing a small creek on fallen logs. We all went together, my older siblings and I looking after the little ones. The school was just one room, with a teacher who taught all grades at once. Miss Martha, a thin lady with glasses perched on the tip of her nose, her hair always tied in a tight bun. She was strict, would rap your knuckles with a ruler if you got your times tables wrong. But sometimes she'd bring apple butter for those who behaved well. We'd return home after midday. My mother would leave food ready: rice, beans, and, when we were lucky, a small piece of meat or a fried egg. After school, the chores began. Ida and I helped our mother wash clothes in the tub, hang them on the clothesline stretched between two trees. Gerald would help our father in the fields or take care of the animals. We had some chickens, a pig, and a milk cow. The twins were still little, but they already had their tasks, like gathering firewood near the house or feeding corn to the chickens. We played when there was time left over. Back then, we didn't have television, we didn't even have a radio at home. The games were simple: tag, hide and seek, ring around the rosy, hopscotch that we scratched in the dirt with a stick. We made cornhusk dolls and broomstick horses. My brother Gerald was good with a slingshot, hunting small birds that my mother would prepare in a tasty stew. At night, after supper, my father would sit on the front porch bench to smoke his hand-rolled cigarette and look at the stars. Sometimes he'd tell old stories, ghost stories from when he was a boy. My mother would mend clothes by the light of an oil lamp while we children listened to the stories or played guessing games. We went to bed early, with the crickets singing outside. On Sundays, we went to church in town. It was a special day. We wore our good clothes, the only ones each of us had for such occasions. We went by wagon, borrowed from neighbor Zeke. The town seemed like another world to me. It had electric lights, some brick houses, the central square with a gazebo where sometimes a band would play. After the service, my father would buy us stick candy, which was a real treat. That's how it was until I was about 10 years old. A simple life, sometimes hard because of poverty, but I don't remember feeling that I lacked anything important. We had food on the table, a roof over our heads, and that kind of quiet, somewhat rough love from my parents. But things started to change when I entered adolescence. That's when I began to notice strange things, small signs of what would become the biggest scare of my life. I remember that, at 13, I started waking up with a strange sensation. My nails, which I let grow because I thought they were pretty, would be shorter in the morning, as if they had been chewed during the night. At first, I thought maybe I did this myself while sleeping, without realizing. My sister Ida, who slept with me, said I was restless in my sleep, that I tossed and turned a lot in bed. I talked to my mother about it. She looked at my hands carefully and said, "Must be chiggers, child. Sometimes they itch so much that you end up biting your nails without realizing." She made me a warm water bath with coarse salt for my feet, but the problem continued. Worse still, I began to notice that sometimes I woke up with the tips of my fingers kind of damp, as if someone had put something on them. I began to be afraid to sleep. As the days passed, that feeling of being watched during the night just grew. I started sleeping restlessly, waking up several times, looking at all the corners of the dark room. Ida complained that I wouldn't stop turning in bed, that I said nonsensical things during sleep. "Is something wrong with you, Dorothy?" she'd ask, concerned. But I didn't know how to explain. This was more than just a simple problem of bitten nails. It was a feeling that something or someone was invading my most intimate space while I was vulnerable, sleeping. The idea gave me chills. I began to observe everyone around me with suspicion. It was around my 14th year that the situation got worse. We came to think it might be some small animal coming into the room at night. My father changed the floorboards that had gaps, checked all the walls, but found nothing. My mother made folk remedies, put sprigs of rosemary under my pillow, gave me chamomile tea to calm my nerves. Nothing helped. One day, on a Sunday afternoon after church, I heard about a case that froze my blood. Mr. Jackson's daughter, who lived across the river, had been, how can I say this, molested while she slept. The culprit was a young man from the neighboring farm who would sneak in through the window. When I heard this, my head began to boil with terrible thoughts. What if it was that? What if someone was coming into our room at night? But who? Gerald slept in the living room, on the other side of the house. My father was an upright man, a hard worker, had never given cause for suspicion. The twins were too small. Who else could it be? I started to imagine it could be someone from outside, maybe one of the boys from town or some drifter passing through the area. The fear grew inside me, fed by my fertile teenage imagination. On a stormy night, when the thunder was so loud it seemed it would knock down our house, I made a decision. I wasn't going to sleep anymore until I discovered what was happening. I fixed my bed as usual, lay down next to Ida, who soon fell asleep, and stayed awake, with my eyes half closed, pretending to sleep. Time passed slowly. The house grew silent. My father's snores in the next room, Ida's calm breathing. Outside, the wind howled and the rain beat hard against the windows. My eyelids grew heavy. I fought against sleep. 1, 2 hours passed. I was almost giving up when I heard the floorboard creak. My heart raced. Someone was in the room. Through half-closed eyelids, I saw a silhouette approach my bed. It was a masculine figure, tall. For a moment, I thought about screaming, about jumping out of bed and running, but fear paralyzed me. The figure knelt beside my bed. It was then that lightning illuminated the room for an instant, and I saw. It was my father. Benjamin was there, kneeling beside my bed, holding my hand that had been left outside the blanket. My heart almost jumped out of my mouth. What was he doing? Why? With the room back in darkness, I contained the impulse to open my eyes. I breathed deeply, trying to stay calm. That's when I felt it. He was bringing my hand to his mouth. I could feel his warm breath on my fingers, and then the sound. That almost imperceptible sound of nails being chewed. My own father was chewing my nails while I slept. The shock was so great that I forgot to pretend I was sleeping. I suddenly opened my eyes and pulled away my hand. My father, startled, fell backwards. We stared at each other for a moment, both paralyzed by the shock. "Dad," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What are you doing?" He stayed there, kneeling on the floor with an expression I had never seen before. He seemed ashamed, frightened. I can't say. Without answering, he quickly got up and left the room. I spent the rest of the night awake, trembling under the covers. My head was a whirlwind of confused thoughts. Why would my father do something like that? What kind of perversion was that? The stories I had heard about men who abused girls came to the surface. Was that what was happening to me? My own father? The next morning, I couldn't look at him during breakfast. My mother noticed something was wrong, but didn't say anything. All day long I thought about how to confront him, how to tell my mother, or if I should tell. What if he denied it? What if nobody believed me? At the end of that day, I decided that I needed to sort this out. I waited for everyone to go to bed and went to the living room, where my father was sitting alone, smoking his hand-rolled cigarette before going to bed. "Dad," I began, my voice trembling, "why were you in my room last night? Why were you chewing my nails?" He remained silent for a long time, looking at the floor. I thought he wasn't going to answer, that he might get angry, call me a liar. But then he put out his cigarette, sighed deeply, and raised his eyes to me. His eyes were watery. I had never seen my father cry. "Come here, child," he said, his voice hoarse. I hesitated, scared, but I approached. He stood up and went to the old cabinet in the corner of the room. From there, he took out a wooden box that I had never seen before. He sat down again and placed it in his lap. "Sit here," he pointed to the bench beside him. I obeyed, keeping a certain distance. He opened the box and took out some yellowed photographs and a folded letter. He handed me one of the photos. It was me, at about 3 or 4 years old. My face and arms were covered with deep scratches, some still with blood. I sat looking at that, not understanding. "You don't remember," he began, his voice low. "But when you were little, you had a problem. You suffered from, what did the doctor call it? Somnambulism, I think. You moved a lot during sleep, scratched yourself all over. Once you almost poked your eye with your own nail." He showed me another photo where I appeared with a large bandage near my right eye, my face still marked by scratches. "Your mother and I were desperate. We took you to the doctor in Nashville after you had hurt yourself badly. He wanted to give you strong medicine, the kind that leaves a person almost in a coma. Your mother wouldn't allow it, said it would do you harm." My father sighed, looking at his own large, calloused hands. "I tried everything. I tied your hands with soft cloths so you wouldn't scratch yourself, but you cried so much that we had to untie them. I tried to cut your nails very short, but you would wake up with the sound of the little scissors and have crying fits. So—" He paused, as if looking for courage to continue. "So I started doing it the only way that worked, without waking you up." I felt a chill run down my spine. My father continued, his voice getting lower and lower. "Every night, I would go into your room and chew your nails while you slept. It was the only way to keep them short without you noticing, without you hurting yourself. Over time, you stopped scratching yourself. The problem seemed to have passed. But I continued. It became a habit, a way of taking care of you, of making sure you would be all right." I sat there, looking at that rough man of few words, telling me something so strange and at the same time so full of love. A twisted, awkward love that had found this bizarre way to express itself. "Why did you never tell me?" I asked, confused by all that. "At the beginning, you were too young to understand. Later I felt ashamed. I knew it was strange, that people wouldn't understand, that you might be disgusted by me." We sat in silence for a while, both processing that difficult conversation. Inside me, the fear and revulsion I had felt began to give way to a confused understanding. It wasn't normal what my father did, but it also wasn't what I had imagined. None of those terrible things I had heard about men who abused girls. "I'll stop," he said finally. "You're a young lady now. You don't need this anymore. I'm sorry if I scared you." Before I could answer, he got up, put away the box and left for the bedroom. I sat there alone in the dark living room for a long time, trying to understand what had happened, what I felt. That night, lying in bed, looking at the ceiling, I thought a lot about the love of parents for their children. How it can be complicated, take strange forms sometimes. My father, a rustic countryman, had found that twisted way to protect me, to take care of me. And I, who had imagined the worst, felt confused between relief and a kind of tenderness mixed with embarrassment. In the days that followed that conversation with my father, I lived in a strange limbo of emotions. On one hand, I felt a great relief to know that none of what my imagination had fabricated was happening, no kind of abuse. On the other hand, there was still a discomfort, an embarrassment difficult to explain. After all, even though I understood my father's reasons, it was still strange, even bizarre, to think of him chewing my nails while I slept. At night, lying in bed, I would be alert to any creaking of the floorboards, any shadow that passed by the crack in the door. When I finally fell asleep, I had confused nightmares where I saw myself as a child, scratching my own face until it bled, while my father watched, helpless. At the breakfast table, the silence between us weighed heavily. My mother noticed that something had changed but didn't ask anything. Maybe she thought it was a teenage thing, a phase, or maybe she knew everything from the beginning and just respected the strange way my father had found to protect me. It was my sister Ida who first noticed that I was different. One afternoon, while we were washing clothes together, she asked me directly, in her way, "Did something happen between you and Dad? You barely look at each other." I hesitated, not knowing what to say. How to explain something so strange, so intimate? But Ida was more than my sister. She was my confidant. If there was anyone I could open up to, it was her. "Ida," I began softly, "have you ever noticed anything strange with my nails? In the morning sometimes?" She frowned, confused. "Like what?" "They seem chewed." Ida put down the dress she was scrubbing and looked at me attentively. Now that you mention it, yes, I have noticed. I thought it was you yourself who chewed them during the night. It's not me, I answered. It's Dad. Her eyes widened, shocked. What do you mean, Dad? What does he... And so I told Ida everything. The discovery on the stormy night, the conversation afterward, the photos, the scratches. As I spoke, I saw her face go from shock to confusion and then to a kind of reluctant understanding. That's weird, she said when I finished. But thinking about it, it makes sense. I remember when you were little, how you hurt yourself sleeping. Mom would stay up all night, watching you. There was one time when you scratched your arm so much it was raw. I remember their desperation. It was comforting to hear this from Ida, to know that she remembered too, that it wasn't some story invented by my father, that it had really happened. Even so, she continued, he should have told you. It's kind of scary to know that someone comes into your room every night without you knowing. I nodded in agreement. The secret was the most disturbing part. If my father had explained from the beginning, maybe I would have understood. Maybe I wouldn't have felt so much fear, so much disgust. In the weeks that followed, the days passed, and gradually a new routine was established. My father kept his promise and never came into my room at night again. Little by little, we went back to talking normally, although there was always a certain embarrassment hanging between us, an invisible barrier that didn't exist before. I started taking care of my own nails, cutting them very short before going to sleep. But one night, I had an agitated dream. I dreamt of a rabid dog chasing me through the woods, its sharp teeth almost reaching my heels. I woke up frightened, my heart racing, and realized that I had scratched my own arm during sleep. It wasn't anything serious, just a few red marks, but it was enough to make me think. That morning, while we were having coffee, I looked at my father and said, "You were right. Last night, I scratched myself in my sleep." He raised his eyes from his cup, surprised that I had brought up the subject. He nodded slightly with his head, without saying anything. I think I haven't completely overcome the problem," I continued. "Maybe when I have nightmares, or sleep restlessly." My father put his cup on the table, thoughtful. "It will pass, daughter. With time, you're not a child anymore." My mother looked from one to the other, clearly confused by the conversation. My father noticed and, for the first time, decided to explain to her. "Eleanor," he began, "I need to tell you something about Dorothy and that problem she had when she was little, about scratching herself in her sleep." And so, there at the breakfast table, my father told my mother everything. How he had started chewing my nails to protect me, how he had continued all those years, how I had discovered. I expected to see shock, maybe even anger on my mother's face, but what I saw was different. When my father finished speaking, my mother remained silent for a moment, looking at him with watery eyes. Then, to my surprise, she extended her hand across the table and held my father's large, calloused hand. "I knew," she said, her voice low. "I always knew, Benjamin." It was my father's turn to look surprised. "You knew? How?" My mother gave a small, sad smile. "A mother senses these things. Sometimes I would wake up at night and notice you weren't in bed. I would hear the floorboards creak. One night, I followed you and saw you kneeling beside Dorothy's bed." "And you never said anything?" my father asked, his voice a little hoarse. What was I going to say? You were doing it your way, the way you thought best to protect our daughter. She squeezed his hand. "It wasn't the way I would have chosen, but it worked, didn't it?" She stopped hurting herself. I sat there, witnessing that conversation between my parents, feeling a mixture of emotions. There was something powerful, almost sacred in that moment. The silent understanding between them, the unspoken forgiveness, the love that existed beyond words. It was then that I began to understand something profound about love. that it doesn't always come in beautiful or socially acceptable forms. That, sometimes, loving someone means doing strange, uncomfortable, even frightening things. My father, a simple countryman, without education, without knowledge of psychology or medicine, had found, in his desperation, a completely unusual solution to protect me. And my mother, in her silent wisdom, had allowed it, had understood. That morning marked the beginning of a new phase in our family. It was as if a weight had been removed, a secret too heavy to be carried alone, now shared and accepted by all of us. We began to speak more openly about things that were previously kept in silence, about fears, about worries, about love. One night, a few weeks later, I woke up from a nightmare. I was sweating, my heart racing. Without thinking much, I got out of bed and went to my parents' room. I hesitated at the door, but then knocked lightly. I heard my father's sleepy voice asking who it was. "It's me, Dad," I answered softly. "I had a nightmare." I heard the bed creak, and soon the door opened. My father was there, his hair tousled from sleep, his eyes half closed in the dim light. "Is everything all right, daughter?" he asked, his voice full of concern. "Yes, it is," I answered. "I just wanted you to help me cut my nails. I'm afraid of scratching myself again." My father stood still for a moment, as if he was processing what I had said. Then, without saying anything, he nodded and followed me to the kitchen. He lit the oil lamp and got the small scissors that my mother used for sewing. Carefully, he cut my nails one by one. His huge, calloused hands held mine with surprising delicacy. When he finished, he put away the scissors and turned off the oil lamp. In the dark kitchen, he simply said, "There, now go sleep peacefully." Before returning to my room, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I gave my father a hug. He was a bit awkward, unaccustomed to displays of affection, but after a moment, his strong arms enveloped me in a brief but meaningful embrace. "Thank you, Dad," I whispered. "Go to sleep, child," he answered, his voice choked up. That night was a turning point. What before was a source of fear and confusion for me had transformed into something different. A deeper understanding of love in all its strange and imperfect forms, and more importantly, an acceptance of that love, even when it came disguised as something that, at first glance, seemed frightening. The atmosphere at home gradually changed. It was as if that revealed secret had lanced a boil that had been inflamed for years. It hurt, pus came out, but then came relief. My father began to smile more, my mother seemed lighter. I myself started sleeping better, without fear of what might happen during the night, but not everything was perfect. There were days when, crossing paths with my father in the living room, I still felt a slight discomfort, a blush rising up my neck. As much as I understood his reasons, as much as I accepted that it was a gesture of love, it was still strange. How to explain it to people? If someone in town or at school knew that my father came into my room at night and chewed my nails, what would they think? It was a secret we had to keep at all costs. And it was precisely this thought that tormented me when, on a Sunday after church, I was invited to a 15th birthday party for Rose Freeland, daughter of the town's general store owner. It would be my first young ladies' party, as my mother called it. "Dorothy will need a new dress," my mother commented to my father as we were returning from church. "She can't go to Rose's party with that old dress." My father scratched his head, worried. "Money's tight, Eleanor. The harvest wasn't good this year." "I can remake my blue dress," my mother insisted. "I can adjust it to Dorothy's figure, make some new ruffles. It will look pretty." My heart beat faster. A party, a new dress or almost. The chance to socialize with other girls my age, to maybe dance with some boy. It was all I wanted most at that age. During the following week, my mother worked on the dress. Her skillful hands transformed the light blue fabric into something new with a white lace sash at the waist, a more modest neckline, suitable for a young lady. I tried on the dress several times, twirling in front of the small, cracked mirror we had in the room. But on the eve of the party, something happened. It was dark, already past midnight. The whole house was sleeping in silence. Suddenly, I woke up with a start. Something had frightened me, but I didn't know what. I lay there, trying to listen. The silence of the night was broken only by my father's snores in the room next door and the distant hooting of an owl. It was then that I felt it, something damp on my fingers. I slowly turned my head and saw the silhouette. My father was there, kneeling beside my bed. Even in the darkness, I could see that his eyes were closed, his breathing irregular. He was holding my hand, and he was chewing my nails again. The shock was like a cold shower. He had promised to stop. He had sworn he wouldn't do this anymore. And now he was there, breaking his promise. "Dad!" I exclaimed, pulling my hand away. He seemed to wake from a trance, looking around, confused. "Dorothy? What happened?" "You were doing it again," I accused, my voice trembling with anger and disappointment. "Chewing my nails. You promised you would stop." He looked at my hands, then at his own hands, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. I didn't—" "You lied to me," I continued, tears beginning to flow. "You said you had stopped, but you were deceiving me this whole time." "No, daughter, I swear." He tried to explain, his voice hoarse. "I did stop. I don't know what happened. I think I did it while sleeping." "While sleeping?" "Yes, sometimes I walk in my sleep. I do things without realizing. Your mother has already told me that I get up, move things around, return to bed, and don't remember anything the next day." I looked at him, skeptical. "Sleepwalking? You want me to believe that?" "It's true, daughter. I swear to God." He made the sign of the cross, something he rarely did. "I promised I would stop, and I did stop. But it seems that it became such a strong habit that my body does it even when I'm sleeping." We remained in silence for a moment, only the sound of our breathing filling the dark room. What he said made some sense. I remembered the stories that my mother told about neighbor Zeke, who once walked in his sleep and was found in the middle of the cornfield in his pajamas. "If I were awake," my father continued, "I would never have done this. You believe me, don't you?" There was a plea in his voice, a desperation I had never heard before. This strong, quiet man, who rarely showed emotion, now seemed on the verge of tears. "I believe you, Dad," I finally answered. And it was true. Deep down, I knew he wouldn't lie about something like this. Not after we had talked openly, not after the promise made. He sighed with relief, running his hands through his graying hair. "I'll find a way to solve this. I promise." The next day, when I woke up, I found my father in the kitchen, building something with pieces of wood. They were 2 thin boards, joined by leather hinges. "What is that, Dad?" I asked. "It's for you," he answered, without raising his eyes from his work. "It will help protect your hands during the night." He had created a kind of box that, when closed, would completely cover my hands. There were small holes for ventilation and a clasp that I could open and close myself. It was rustic, but functional. "You put your hands in here before sleeping," he explained. "That way, even if it happens again, I won't be able to reach your nails." I looked at that strange object, feeling a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. It was the solution he had found, the best he could offer with his limited resources and simple knowledge. "Thank you, Dad," I murmured. That night, following his instructions, I put my hands inside the wooden box before sleeping. It was strange at first, uncomfortable, but eventually I managed to fall asleep. The next morning, I woke up with my hands still protected. The clasp was intact. I felt an immense relief. The solution had worked. But the night of the party was approaching, and a new thought occurred to me. How would I explain this strange object to Ida, who slept in the same bed? And if someone else saw it? The girls from town would laugh at me, ask questions that I couldn't answer. I decided that, just for one night, I would not use the box. After all, what harm could it do? It was just an exception for the night of the party. The big day arrived. My mother helped me get ready, combing my hair with sugar water to fix the curls, tying them with blue ribbons that matched the dress. I put on a bit of rouge that my mother kept for special occasions, a little lipstick. When I looked in the cracked mirror, I almost didn't recognize myself. I looked like a real young lady, no longer a girl. The party was magical. Rose's house was decorated with colored paper lanterns. There was a gramophone playing lively music. The girls on one side, the boys on the other, all shy at first. But soon, encouraged by the adults, we began to dance. It was the first time I danced with a boy. Charlie Mayfield, the cobbler's son, asked me to dance a slow waltz. He was older, must have been about 18, and smelled of aftershave. His hands were soft, not calloused like my father's, and he had a delicate way of leading. "You look pretty today, Dorothy," he said, as we twirled around the improvised dance floor. I felt my face heat up. Never had a boy complimented me before. "Thank you," I answered, looking down, too shy to meet his brown eyes. We danced 2 more songs, and then he took me to have a glass of cherry punch. We talked about simple things, the weather, school, plans for the future. He wanted to follow his father's trade, but dreamed of having his own shoe shop in the big city, in Pittsburgh perhaps. "And you?" he asked. "What do you want to do when you finish school?" I had never thought much about it. In our reality, girls like me didn't have many options besides getting married and having children. Maybe working as a servant in some family's house in the city, if I was lucky. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Maybe study more? Be a teacher someday?" He smiled, seeming to approve of the idea. "You would be a good teacher. You have patience." I felt something strange in my stomach, like butterflies flying. It was the first time that someone, outside my family, saw something special in me, some potential. The party continued until late, and when we returned home, I was floating with happiness. I didn't want that night to ever end. I lay in bed next to Ida, who was already sleeping deeply, and kept reliving each moment, each word exchanged with Charlie. I completely forgot about the wooden box. I forgot to protect my hands. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. The house was in complete silence. The moon entered through the window, partially illuminating the room. And there he was again. My father, kneeling beside my bed, holding my hand, chewing my nails. This time I didn't scream, didn't pull away my hand. I lay observing, with my heart heavy. His eyes were closed, his breathing was deep and regular. He really was sleeping, acting on pure instinct. Gently, I touched his arm. "Dad," I whispered. "Dad, wake up." He opened his eyes slowly, confused. When he realized what he was doing, he dropped my hand as if it burned. "Again," he murmured, his voice choked. "My God, again." "It's okay, Dad," I said, trying to calm him. "It's not your fault. You were sleeping." He shook his head, the shame and guilt evident on his face. "This has to end, Dorothy. I can't continue like this. Tomorrow we'll use the wooden box," I promised. "It was my mistake. I should have used it today, but because of the party." My father stood up, seeming to make a difficult decision. "No, it's not you who has to adapt. It's me who needs to stop this." The next night, when everyone had already gone to bed, I heard noise coming from the kitchen. I got up silently and went to see what it was. I found my father sitting at the table, tying his own hands with ropes. "Dad, what are you doing?" I asked, alarmed. "Ensuring that I won't do that again," he answered, determined. "I'm going to tie my hands every night before sleeping. That way, even if I get up while sleeping, I won't be able to take your hands nor chew your nails." I stood looking at that man, my father, sacrificing his own comfort for me. The ropes were tight around his wrists, leaving red marks on the skin. "Dad, that will hurt you," I protested. "Better this way than continuing with this. One day you'll marry, have your own house. And me?" Am I going to invade your house at night to chew your nails? No, Dorothy, this needs to end now. There was a determination in his voice that admitted no contestation. He was right. What had begun as a protective gesture had transformed into something more complex, a deeply rooted habit, almost an obsession. That night, my father slept with his hands tied. The next morning, when he went to wash his face, I saw the deep marks of the ropes on his wrists. It hurt my heart to see that, to know that he was hurting himself because of me. It was the moment when I realized that we needed help. We couldn't solve this alone. Mom, I called while we were washing clothes. We need to take Dad to see a real doctor, not a faith healer. My mother hesitated when I spoke of taking my father to the doctor. In our reality, seeking a real doctor, a graduate, was something almost unthinkable for people like us. It was expensive, it was far, and many still believed more in the healers and faith healers of the region than in doctor's medicine. We don't have money for that, Dorothy, my mother argued, wringing a wet sheet forcefully. And your father will never accept it. He's hurting himself, Mom, I insisted. The ropes leave marks on his wrists every morning. And even so, sometimes he manages to untie his hands during the night. It was true. Despite my father's efforts, some nights he still managed, in his sleepwalking state, to untie the knots and come to my room. I would wake up with him kneeling beside my bed, chewing my nails, even against his own conscious will. It was as if two different people inhabited the same body, the daytime Benjamin, who did everything to stop that strange habit, and the nighttime Benjamin, who couldn't avoid it. It was Ida who gave us the solution. Dr. Matthews, she suggested during dinner a few days later. He provides free care at the church once a month. He comes from Nashville to care for the poor. My parents looked at each other. Dr. Matthews was known in the region. He was an elderly doctor with a white beard and kind eyes who dedicated one Sunday a month to freely attend to the most needy in the back room of the church. It was said that he did this as penance to compensate for some serious error in the past. When does he come again? My father asked, surprising everyone. Next Sunday, answered Ida, who knew about everything that happened in the community. But you have to arrive early. The line forms before dawn. My father nodded, without saying anything more. But on the following Sunday, well before the sun rose, he woke us up. Let's go, he said simply. And there we went, the whole family, walking along the dark road, illuminated only by a kerosene lamp. We arrived at the church when the sky was beginning to lighten. There were already some people in line, a mother with a sick baby, an old man with a persistent cough, a pregnant young woman with deep, dark circles under her eyes. We waited patiently. When the sun was already high in the sky, finally our turn came. The back room of the church was small and simple. A wooden table served as a desk for Dr. Matthews, a man of about 70 years, with a well-trimmed white beard and round glasses on the tip of his nose. "What brings you here today?" he asked in a calm voice, looking at our family. My father, a man of few words, didn't know how to begin. He stood there, twisting his hat in his hands, looking at the floor. "It's my father, doctor." I decided to take the initiative. "He has a problem. He walks in his sleep." "Somnambulism?" the doctor asked, adjusting his glasses. "Yes, that's it," I confirmed, relieved that he understood so quickly. "But it's not just walking. He does specific things." The doctor looked at my father with renewed interest. "What kind of things, sir?" My father cleared his throat, uncomfortable. I go to my daughter's room and chew her nails while she sleeps." There was a moment of silence. The doctor showed no surprise or judgment, just made a note in his notebook. "How long has this been happening?" "It started when she was little," my father explained, gaining courage. "She would scratch herself during sleep, hurt herself badly. I started cutting her nails while she slept, to prevent her from injuring herself, but using scissors would wake her up, so I started chewing them. With time, it became a habit. Even after she stopped scratching herself, I continued. "And when did you discover that you did this while sleeping?" the doctor asked, with scientific interest in his eyes. "A few months ago," my father answered. "My daughter caught me in her room, chewing her nails during the night. I promised to stop, but I realized that I continued doing it even without remembering. I'm tying my hands before sleeping, but sometimes I manage to untie the knots without realizing." Dr. Matthews looked at my father's wrists, where the marks of the ropes were visible. He asked to examine my father in more detail, checked his eyes, listened to his heart, measured his blood pressure with an apparatus that we had never seen before. Then, he sat back down and looked at us seriously. "What you have is, indeed, somnambulism associated with compulsive behavior," he explained. "It's not common, but it's also not unprecedented. I've seen similar cases, although with different manifestations. A lady who prepared coffee at dawn and didn't remember. A man who rearranged the furniture in the house while sleeping." "Is there a cure, doctor?" my mother asked, apprehensive. "It's not exactly a disease, ma'am, but a sleep disorder that can be controlled," he clarified. "I'm going to prescribe a medication that will help your husband have a deeper and less agitated sleep. I'll also guide some changes in routine." He wrote a prescription on a paper and handed it to my father. "This medicine needs to be taken every night, half an hour before sleeping. It's not cheap, but I'll give you some samples that I have with me to start the treatment. I also recommend that you avoid caffeine, don't drink coffee after 4 in the afternoon, and mainly, reduce stress." "Stress?" my father asked, not quite understanding the word. "Worries, anguish, problems that make you anxious," the doctor explained patiently. "The calmer you are before sleeping, the less chances of episodes of somnambulism." As we left the improvised office, we carried a small box with medicine bottles, enough for a month, and a paper with detailed instructions. It was the first time that my father had consulted a real doctor, and he seemed both hopeful and distrustful. "Will this really work?" he asked, looking at the bottles. "We have to try, Benjamin," my mother answered, determined. "It can't continue the way it is." That same night, my father took the first pill, rigorously following Dr. Matthews's instructions. He also avoided drinking coffee after lunch, something he had never done before. After dinner, instead of smoking his hand-rolled cigarette looking at the stars, he sat in the living room while my mother read aloud passages from the Bible, one of the doctor's recommendations to calm the mind before sleeping. That first night was tranquil. I woke up several times expecting to see my father's silhouette beside the bed, but he didn't appear. When the sun rose, I went to my parents' room and saw my father still deeply asleep, a calm sleep like he hadn't had in a long time. The following weeks brought a notable change in our house. My father slept better, no longer wandered around the house during the night. The climate of tension that had installed itself between us since the discovery of his nocturnal habit began to dissipate, replaced by a sensation of relief and hope. But the real turning point wasn't the medicine or the changes in routine. It was something completely unexpected. In early June, almost 2 months after our visit to Dr. Matthews, I received a note at school. It was from Charlie Mayfield, the boy with whom I had danced at Rose's 15th birthday party. "Dorothy, I need to talk to you. Meet me at the crossroads after school. It's important. Charlie." My heart raced, reading those words written in careful handwriting. What could Charlie want with me? We hadn't spoken since the party, although sometimes we would cross paths in town and exchange shy glances. When the classes ended, I went to the indicated crossroads, my legs trembling with nervousness. Charlie was already there, leaning against a tree, looking as nervous as I was. "Hi, Dorothy," he greeted, taking off his hat. "Thank you for coming." "What happened?" I asked, curious. "It's that," he began, hesitating. "I got a job at Mr. Miller's shoe shop in Pittsburgh. I'm going to be his apprentice with a chance to be a partner later." "That's great, Charlie," I exclaimed, sincerely happy for him, although a pang of sadness hit me at the thought that he would be leaving. "Yes, it's a great opportunity," he continued, twisting his hat in his hands. "But before I go, I wanted to ask you something." He breathed deeply, gathering courage. "Your father, would he allow me to write you letters? And for you to answer me?" The question caught me by surprise. Letters? This meant that Charlie wanted to keep in touch, that he cared about me enough for this. I think so," I answered, feeling my face heat up. "I can ask him." "Please, ask him," Charlie requested, his eyes full of hope. "I liked you a lot, Dorothy. I don't want to lose contact just because I'm moving to another city." That night, during dinner, I worked up the courage and told my parents about Charlie's request. I expected resistance, especially from my father, always so protective. But to my surprise, he just nodded. "The Mayfield boy? He's from a good family," he commented between forkfuls of beans. "Hard-working, respectful. If he wants to write to you, I don't see a problem." My mother smiled discreetly, exchanging a knowing look with me. It was the first time that my father treated me like a young lady, no longer like a child who needed to be protected at all costs. The next day, I gave the answer to Charlie. His face lit up with a smile that made my heart skip. "I'll write to you every week," he promised, briefly holding my hands. "And when I'm established there, with a good job, who knows? Who knows, you might come visit me, with your parents' permission, of course." The idea of going to Pittsburgh, of seeing Charlie in the big city, was both frightening and exciting. A possibility that I had never considered before opened up in front of me, like a door to a new world. Charlie left for Pittsburgh the following week. As promised, his letters began to arrive regularly. At first, they were simple letters, telling about the trip, the city, the new job. Later, they became more personal, with declarations of missing me and phrases that made my heart race. Each letter that arrived was an event in our house. My father, who barely knew how to read, would ask me to read aloud, omitting, of course, the more romantic parts. He seemed genuinely interested in Charlie's life in the city, in the opportunities that arose, in the stories he told. One day, after reading another letter, my father made a comment that changed everything. "This young man has a future, and you could have one too, Dorothy." I looked at him, not quite understanding. "You're intelligent, daughter. You always were. Here in the country, you don't have a chance to study more, to grow. But in the city—" My mother, who was sewing in silence near the window, raised her head, as surprised as I was by those words. "What are you saying, Dad?" I asked, hesitantly. "I'm saying that maybe it's time for you to follow your path. There in Pittsburgh, there's a normal school to train teachers. You always said you wanted to be a teacher, didn't you?" It was true. Since I was little, I had played school with my younger siblings. It was a distant dream that I never thought I could realize. "But how?" I asked, still incredulous. "We don't have money for this." "I've been saving a little," my father revealed. "It's not much, but it's enough to start. And there's your mother's cousin, Lenora, who lives there in Pittsburgh. She said several times that you could stay with her if you wanted to study in the city." You would let me go?" I asked, my voice choked with emotion. My father remained silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on some distant point. When he spoke, his voice was loaded with contained emotion. "I've spent my life trying to protect you, Dorothy. Sometimes, in strange ways, that even I didn't quite understand. But I realized that I can't protect you from everything, forever. At some point, you need to follow your own path, and I think that moment has come." That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep from so much excitement. Pittsburgh, normal school, the possibility of seeing Charlie regularly. It was as if a whole world of possibilities had opened up before me. And it all began with that strange, frightening moment when I caught my father chewing my nails during the night. If that hadn't happened, if we hadn't been forced to confront that strange habit, if we hadn't sought medical help, perhaps my father would never have found the inner peace necessary to let me go. In the following weeks, preparations for my move took over the house. My mother sewed new clothes, more suitable for the city. My father saved every penny to help with initial expenses. Ida lent me her few books so that I could study even before starting classes. And so, on a clear day in August of 1965, I boarded the bus that would take me from Oak Ridge to Pittsburgh. I was 16 years old and had a cardboard suitcase with everything I owned. On the platform, my father held my hands, those same hands whose nails he used to chew during the night, and said with his voice breaking, "Go, daughter, be happy, and remember that there's always a place for you here at home." The bus departed, taking me to a life completely different from the one I had known until then. I was leaving behind not only my family, but also the fear, confusion, and embarrassment that had marked that strange period of my life. It was only years later, already an adult, graduated and married to Charlie, that I fully understood the sacrifice my father had made in letting me leave. For a man like him, raised with the idea that the place of women was at home, protected by family, sending me to the big city was an act of love as deep and challenging as that strange habit of chewing my nails to protect me. And that's how that moment of shock and horror, when I discovered my father kneeling beside my bed, transformed into the catalyst for the greatest change in my life, the one that took me from Little Oak Ridge to the world, from ignorance to knowledge, from fear to freedom. Today, when I look back at that 16-year-old girl who boarded a bus with a cardboard suitcase and a heart full of dreams and fears, I can hardly believe the life I've built. I've been living here in Millbrook for almost 50 years now. I came here after Charlie and I got married. He had managed to set up his own shoe shop, first in Pittsburgh, then here, and I, already graduated from normal school, had secured a position as a primary teacher at the local school. Our house is on a quiet street, with a yard where I planted my flowers and herbs. It's a simple house, but comfortable, with 3 bedrooms, one for us, another that was for our children, and now receives our grandchildren when they come to visit, and a third where I set up a small embroidery studio, which has been my passion since retirement. Charlie is gone now. It's been 5 years. A heart attack, quick and without warning. We were planning a trip to the coast to celebrate our golden wedding anniversary. He didn't live to see our youngest grandchild born, but he was a good husband, a good father, and we had a happy life together. I miss him every day, especially on Sunday mornings when he used to bring fresh bread from the bakery and we would have breakfast together, listening to the country music program on the radio. Our 3 children are all grown up with their own families. Helen, the oldest, is a doctor in Philadelphia. Robert followed in his father's footsteps and has a shoe factory in Boston. And the youngest, Benjamin, named in honor of my father, is a university professor in Chicago. I have 5 grandchildren who are the light of my life. When they come to visit, I fill the house with cookies and cakes, and we tell stories until late. My parents lived to a ripe old age. My mother departed first, at 82, sleeping peacefully. My father followed her 2 years later, at 86. He never had more episodes of sleepwalking after beginning treatment with Dr. Matthews. That kind doctor, who provided free care at the church, was a blessing in our lives. Not only did he treat my father, but he also encouraged me to study, to follow the path of education. I remember with fondness my years in Pittsburgh. Cousin Lenora was like a second mother to me. Her house, small but welcoming, became my home during the years of study. She taught me a lot about life in the city, about how to behave, how to speak without the heavy country accent that made the other girls laugh at me in the first days. And of course, she facilitated my meetings with Charlie, always properly chaperoned, as custom required. The normal school was a revelation. I never imagined that I could learn so much, that the world of knowledge was so vast. I studied hard, always among the first in the class. Mathematics was difficult, but I compensated with good grades in English and history. When I graduated in 1968, my parents came for the ceremony. Seeing my father, dressed in his only suit, proud, applauding when I received my diploma, was one of the most emotional moments of my life. Our lives followed paths that I never imagined in that simple house in Oak Ridge. My siblings also prospered, each in their own way. Gerald inherited my parents' small property and managed to expand the production, with modern techniques that he learned in government courses. Ida married a merchant from town and helped to expand his business. The twins, Timothy and Thelma, moved to New York when they were still young, in search of opportunities. Today, my routine is tranquil and full of small joys. I wake up early, with the birds singing, and make my strong coffee. I take care of the plants in the garden before the sun gets too hot. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I go to church, where I am part of the embroidery group that produces pieces to sell to benefit the parish's social works. On Wednesdays, I volunteer giving reinforcement classes for children with learning difficulties at the local library. On weekends, I receive visitors, friends, former students, family members who live nearby. I have a simple life, but a full one. When I think about everything I've lived, the difficulties I've faced, the path traveled since that frightened girl who discovered her father chewing her nails during the night, I feel an immense gratitude. That moment that seemed so terrible, so confusing, ended up being the starting point for a life that surpassed all my expectations. And you know what's most curious? Today, I understand my father in a way that I never imagined I would. A parent's love sometimes takes strange, twisted forms, which we only understand when we ourselves become parents. When my daughter Helen was small and had frequent nightmares, I caught myself several times entering her room in the middle of the night just to check if everything was all right, adjusting her blankets, moving hair away from her face. Love, I learned, doesn't always come in pretty and conventional packages. Sometimes it's strange, awkward, even frightening at first sight. But at its core, it's love. And that's what matters. Now, as I embroider these towels that will be sold at the church bazaar, with these hands wrinkled by time, with these well-cared-for nails that have never again been chewed by either myself or anyone else, I feel peace. Life takes us on unexpected paths, presents us with challenges that seem insurmountable, but it also offers us solutions, exits, new beginnings. I am grateful for each moment, each choice, each person who crossed my path. Even for that fright on that stormy night when I discovered my father kneeling beside my bed. It was the beginning of everything, the beginning of my liberation, of my journey, of the woman I became. You know, my dears, when I look back at all the history I've just told, I realize that life is indeed a book of surprises. The pages that seem darkest, most difficult to read, often end up being those that teach us the most, that lead us to the most beautiful chapters that will come later. That stormy night, when I discovered my father kneeling beside my bed, could have been just a moment of terror, of shame, of misunderstanding. And for a time, it was. But looking now, with the eyes of someone who has lived through so many winters and summers, I see that it was a turning point in my life. It was there that the path began that would lead me out of that simple house in Oak Ridge to my studies, to meeting Charlie, to the profession I loved, to the children I raised, to the life I built. Love doesn't always come in pretty and neat packages. Sometimes it's twisted, awkward, even strange in the eyes of others. My father chewing my nails during the night to protect me from myself is an example of this. A primitive, instinctive love that didn't know how to express itself in any other way. And this taught me a lot about being a mother, about being a grandmother. I learned that loving is, often, doing what is necessary, even if it's not understood at the moment. It's protecting even when it hurts. It's letting go when the time comes to leave. I've learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our capacity to start each day anew, as an old saying goes. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome or joy lived intensely. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. When I found myself at that crossroads, between the fear of the unknown and the comfort of the familiar, I chose to believe that there was a better future waiting for me, even without knowing exactly what it would be. I never allowed my dignity to be stolen, even in the most difficult moments. I discovered that we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take it anymore. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. My story isn't about what happened to me, but about how I chose to respond to it. I learned that true strength isn't in never falling, but in getting up every time. Age gave me the wisdom to understand that it's never too late to start over. My experience taught me that our story doesn't end in painful chapters. I learned that surviving is a form of resistance, and living well is the best revenge against the adversities that life imposes on us. If you're going through a difficult time now, remember, each problem, each anguish has its time to pass. Don't give up on yourself. Seek help when you need it. Talk with friends, family, or professionals who can support you. In every country, in every city, there are people and organizations prepared to help. And if you know someone who is suffering, extend your hand. Sometimes, a simple gesture of affection, a word of support, can change everything for someone who is lost in darkness. Human dignity and respect are values that transcend borders and cultures. Together, as a great human family, we can make a difference in each other's lives. Each small gesture of kindness is like a stone thrown in a lake. The ripples expand far beyond what we can see. And before I say goodbye, I wanted to ask a special favor. If this story touched your heart, if in some way it made sense to you, please click like. Share it also with someone who might need to hear these words. Do it now, my dear, because each day that passes, someone out there needs to hear that it's possible to overcome their deepest fears. And in the comments, leave just one word: gratitude. I want to see how many people got to this point, how many people really listened to this story of overcoming to the end. This simple word will be our secret code, an invisible tie that will unite us through the screens. After all, gratitude is the feeling that most transforms our lives. I am grateful for the life I had, for the challenges I faced, for the people I loved. And I am grateful for you who dedicated your time to listening to the memories of this white-haired lady.